STEM Cell Transitions. My name is Jarmon and I'll be your moderator today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I met you from today, the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I'd ask you to consider how your research might affect the lives of our First Nations peoples. Does it contribute to closing the gap? And if it doesn't, could it? So welcome to the first Transitions Conversation of 2026. This is a somewhat new series with a focus on career development. And today, after a brief introduction from our speakers, we'll be having an interactive Q&A with Sue Dodds, Elise Pebay, and James McNamara on all things fellowships. I have plenty of questions for the panelists myself, but not to be greedy, I've prepared a few different ways in which everyone is able to participate today. So first off, you can raise your hand in the traditional Zoom format. Please use the actual function because then you'll come right to the top of the screen for me. Second, we also have an app called Slido. This is a live poll and a live question app. By clicking on the link in the meeting chat, you'll be able to type your own questions to our panelists and vote on the questions that you like. The more votes a question gets, the higher up the list it goes, and the better the chance that it will get answered. There are a couple of polls that are going to pop up every now and then as well, so feel free to answer those. So please start filling in those questions on that app if you're interested. Winnie, would you like to run the first poll, please, now as well? So today we'll be in conversation with Professor Susan Dodds, previously Senior Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Industry Engagement at La Trobe Uni, and of particular relevance to today's conversation, the current Deputy Chair of the ARC Board. Sue, would you like to briefly walk us through your fellowship journey, touching particularly on your role at the ARC? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jarmon. And just to be clear that this is not a session on ARC fellowships, but I am the Deputy Chair of the Australian Research Council Board, and so look at a range of research schemes, including the current review of the National Competitive Grants Program, which includes things like DECRA, Future Fellowships, and Laureates. But I have a confession, not only am I not a stem cell scientist, I've never held a fellowship. So let's start from there. I'm Professor Emeritus in Philosophy at La Trobe University. I'm on the Council of the Academy of Humanities and the Deputy Chair of the ARC Board. I have had a responsibility for reviewing and evaluating and assessing a wide range of fellowships, including specialist fellowships, for example, at La Trobe, the Tracy Banavanawa Fellowship, which is designed for researchers who've had career interruptions due to caring responsibilities to ensure that they've got the capacity to re-enter the research workforce effectively. But also through the NCGP review, asking questions about, are things like the future fellowships fit for purpose? How do we ensure that there's good institutional support for researchers? And how do we support fellowships at different career stages? So we're really interested in having conversations about those when the time comes. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue. We'll get stuck into some Q&A in just a minute, but please keep those questions coming on the Slido app. Winnie, if it looks like enough people have answered, you can run the second poll if you're happy to. We'll now hear from Elise Pebay, Professor Elise Pebay, who's a Dame Kate Campbell Fellow and Principal Research Fellow at the University of Melbourne, where she co-heads the Stem Cell Disease Modelling Lab. Elise has held multiple competitive fellowships, including both ARC and NHMRC. Elise, would you like to walk us through your experience with fellowships so far, either as an applicant or as a mentor of those who have been applying?
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Alice Pebay. I'm based at the University of Melbourne. I have experience with fellowship in different ways from several angles. So as an applicant to start with, and I would like to mention I have often not gotten fellowship. So although I got them at time, most of the time I did not. And I want this to be clear. When you fail, you don't really fail. It will get better the next time. But also as a reviewer, so both I review at the national level, international level. I've been part of various national schemes, including through the ARC, various fellowships, sitting as a member of the College of Experts, NHMRC, other national schemes that are philanthropic and international. So I review a lot in those schemes, but also, I don't know if mentor is the right name, but as a colleague who tries to help as much as I can people going through this scheme. I don't believe in individual success. I think we succeed collectively. And I know for a fact that when I am successful with a fellowship application, it's because there's a team that has helped me, and I try to lead by example here and to help as I can in that process as well.
Thank you, Elise. We'll move on to our final panels today. James, before we come back to the Q&A. So James McNamara, Dr. James McNamara is a team leader of the muscle signaling group at MCRI. He received his PhD in 2017 from the University of Sydney, did his postdoc at the University of Cincinnati, supported by an American Heart Association postdoc fellowship, and is currently a National Heart Foundation Future Leader Fellow. Welcome, James. So do you want to walk us through your fellowship journey and potentially drawing on some of the bits that weren't mentioned in that little bio, like the misses, as well as which Elise alluded to as well. There are always lots of misses.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks very much, Jarmon, and everyone for the invitation to join this panel. Yeah, I'm at the MCRI. I lead the muscle signaling team. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And as Elise said, I've applied for many more fellowships than I've received. I've been lucky to receive a few. My first one was when I moved to America. I got the American Heart Association postdoctoral fellowship. But between that and my National Heart Foundation fellowship, which I got in 2023, I think I probably applied for 5 to 6, which were unsuccessful at various different ranges of completely triaged early on, and some that got very close. And you learn, as Elise said, you learn from each and every one of those, and you just probably build a thick skin with that as well. I think it's very much required. If you're going to have a career here, you're going to deal with a lot of rejection, but you have to take the positives out of that as well and build stronger. And I guess also, yeah, received my Future Leader Fellowship in 2023, which has helped a lot in my career, and have spent quite a bit of time reviewing Future Leader Fellowships for the Heart Foundation as well. I guess as a cardiovascular scientist, I'm quite lucky that the National Heart Foundation is a great organization, and I appreciate not every subspecialty has these foundations. So yeah, I'm very lucky, but yeah, happy to be here today.
Thank you very much, James. So we'll now turn over to the Q&A portion of today, where you as the audience are more than welcome to ask your questions directly to our panelists. As I said, you can use the raise hand function in chat. You can ask them on the Slido app. As the host, I'm gonna be cheeky and ask a few myself as well. I might kick us off by asking Sue, but more broadly, this will go to the rest of the panel as well. But Sue, just to set the stage, I guess, what does a successful EMCR fellow look like? This could be in the ARC or otherwise. So what sorts of research indicators or impact would you expect to see in someone who is not guaranteed, but going to be a successful fellow?
If I could figure out what would make them guaranteed, I wouldn't be someone who'd never had a fellowship. Look, I think that the key thing is actually a step back, is to ask yourself, why do I want this fellowship? What am I trying to achieve? What is it that this will provide me with the means to do? And if a person doesn't have a clear answer for themselves about why they want a fellowship and what it will do for their career, or what the right stage is for them for that, then there's a lot of easier ways of spending 12 months or so than writing a fellowship application if you don't know the answer to that. So I think asking, what is it that I've been working on? Where am I trying to take things? What do I want to be doing in 10 years' time? And how will the changes in my research lead to that? So clarity about what the fellowship will create the opportunity for someone to do or achieve and to develop into is, I think, vitally important. I don't think anyone is successful in a fellowship when all they say is, I'd like a fellowship to continue doing the research I've been doing. So that's the first bit. Obviously, different fellowships have different funding rules or different cohorts that they're focusing on. Making sure you're aware of that is really important, and not shoehorning yourself in, but being really clear about what is the purpose of a different kind of fellowship. A Fulbright is not the same as a future fellowship. That you may have a program of activity you want to do, but you really need to think about, is this the right vehicle? is this the right place, especially for international fellowships? What support will I get in terms of other people around you? And what do I need? So I don't have a recipe for a perfect fellowship in terms of what do you need to have done in order to be incredibly well placed as a fellow. I think your colleagues will be better placed for that. But I do think that if you're not clear about what you're trying to achieve in your career over the next 5 to 10 years and how the fellowship will support you, you're going to find it very difficult to convince other people about that.
Thank you, Sue. I might jump then straight to a question I had sort of prepared around independence. So I guess if certainly when I was thinking about it was time to start applying for fellowships, it was because I wanted to take over a little bit of independence in my research, direct it towards my own aims, which were similar. They were built on, of course, my lab heads sort of direction, but they were starting to move in their own direction. So this is a question to the entire panel. Being able to demonstrate independence is now essential before you even enter the fellowship space, even for sort of very early career fellowships. Being able to demonstrate some independence gives you that competitive edge, which can push you over the line. How can an EMCR, particularly an ECR, start to demonstrate independence, particularly when they're embedded in larger labs and their ideas are stemming from their supervisors and so on and so forth? Elise, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think Susan nailed it at the start of the answer here, just before by saying you need to, I think, nobody's got the key to success. I think we were trying our best. But one essential point, in my opinion, is to check with you first what you want to do with your life. Fellowship is not the only way to do science, and I think the system is really pushing us a certain way. But it's easy to forget what those fellowships are designed for. So it's really important to sit with yourself first and check that that's actually what you want to do and where you see you're best at doing so. Why? Because fellowships is about leadership. And so once you know that you want to go a certain path, you need to then construct this image of being a leader. And that construction takes time. And that's the second part, I think, of something that might be successful, is you need to give yourself the time to build that momentum and that curriculum you will put towards your application. Time is really important. And within that time, you need to develop a research that you are passionate about, an environment that will support you at the best that it can. That's really important. Again, success does not come in isolation generally. And the narrative that shows that you are a all-rounder, because differently to research grant fellowships are not just about outstanding research. It's about whether or not the candidate will be able to lead that research and that proposal. And so that's where time is important, time to do those things, but also time to mature your way of thinking in order to see yourself as well as that leader or that future leader. And independence comes that way. That means, of course, no, I don't know for you, but I know I can't plan my life for very long. But with that, I still try to have a line of conduct, I would say, with myself. And one of them is, where do I want to go? What do I not want to be? And what do I want to try to aim for? And so with that, if for fellowships or for professional work, it's really important to get that line of conduct and try to build that with time. And that's how you build independence, I think.
James, so I don't want to call you an ECR, but as an EMCR, how did you go about sort of structuring or showing independence, which, fellowship or investigator grants, I assume, is your ballpark?
Yeah, exactly. I think I would agree with Elise. I think for the fellowships, it's a very different game to a grant application because it's much more than the science, right? So it's kind of building a critical mass around you from the start. And I've been lucky. I've been able to stay in cardiovascular research from my PhD all the way through to now. And I've been able to take that research overseas and make connections internationally. And I think that's a really good place to start. Like connections, you got to start with the people because they're the people who you're going to work with for your career. So you make networks with them. That builds new opportunities of maybe community service or more of the soft skills of the science. and build connections through there. And I think that's a big part of like the whole machine of a fellowship, right? You need to show you're developing international leadership. And I think all those other opportunities to take lab tours and, communicate with your science to the non-traditional lay people is really important. So take that. But I think also, on the other hand, nothing's ever going to replace the science either. So it's a tough one to balance because you still need to make sure you're making those publications whilst balancing all this other challenge, all these other aspects. So I think the best way for me is just start small, ask one question, do one thing, and make connections and build up from there. That's really, like Elise said, take the time to kind of question how you're going to approach this. And with every fellowship application, take the time as well to reflect on those comments and maybe the parts of your application that weren't as strong and areas that over the next year, maybe you could build some more strength in, and whether that's the science or whether it's something else. I think that's important to actually self-reflect on those applications as well, to make sure you're applying as strongly as you can.
Yeah, I'll put. Oh, Susan, go ahead.
I was just going to say, getting back to that question about independence and having a program rather than a project that you're working on. I think really it's thinking about the people that you're working with and what is your role. I mean, how do you bring the research forward? What couldn't happen without you being there is one way of articulating your independence. And then how is that connecting with the proposal that you're putting forward for the fellowship? How will you build on that? And who do you need to work with? I think people often find it difficult, especially in heavily collaborative areas of research, to distinguish what their contribution is, whether that's in a promotion application or a fellowship application. I think that, getting a strong sense of, yes, you need to have the support, the technical expertise, the equipment, the mentorship of others, but you bring something to the role. And how are you building that in your fellowship application so that you will be the person who can then take on the leadership role at a greater level at the end of that fellowship? So thinking of that can help you to articulate. And you might want to sense check it with the people around you. Is that what they need you for? Is that why they've brought you in? That can help strengthen the independence case.
Thank you. I think you've all touched on at some point that it takes time to build a fellowship application to sort of articulate what it is that you want, why, make sure that you actually want it in the first place, and then build a strong case. I think a lot of people are probably trying to apply for fellowships straight out of a PhD, or there is a lot of pressure to get one extremely quickly because it's not always possible for lab heads and supervisors to support people for many years. It took me 5 years to get my first sort of competitive fellowship, and I think in other labs, other situations, that would have been too long. I got extremely lucky that I was able to be supported for that period of time. This is again to the entire panel. How have you guys managed to, either yourselves and people that you've worked closely with, manage to bridge that sort of gap to give people the time to build a program of research and to manage to articulate what it is that they're trying to do and develop a strong application, given that funding contracts are usually for 1 or 2 years at a time? Elise?
Yeah, I think that's actually really important. It's an important point to make sure that you are in the most supportive environment you can be in. In my experience, my life has always been easier when I was in, or when I am in supportive environment. Why? Once you have a supervisor, a head of department, head of institute that has decided that you are key to their strategy, they will support you. And so I feel that sometimes, especially when we are more junior, we don't realize the power we have. When you go for a job, of course, you're being interviewed, but you also interview the people you are going to work with. And in that sense, planning for a fellowship or success as an independent researcher is also interviewing the people you're going to work with. Make sure that these people will in fact support you in the difficult time, not just in the easy time when, you know, you're successful and you get that fellowship. And that is, I believe, one of the most difficult steps to reach. But once you found that team, that support, then it will make your life much easier. That means, in my experience, having the difficult discussions with your supervisor, with your heads of department or whatever is your structure, and really get the feedback from them. Will they support you for that gap year? Will they not? Well, if they don't, you know, it's better you know now, and you plan your career as a leader in an environment that will support your vision. And I think these are hard questions. We're not used to ask them, but without that clarity that was mentioned earlier, it is very difficult to develop a career trajectory. So those discussions are also important, in my opinion.
I'm going to ask Nitty. Yes, Sue, go ahead.
I just want to follow up on Lisa's point. I mean, I think while I've not been in the position of needing to apply, this is absolutely a difficult time in higher education to, you know, get that sense of security and really appreciate the challenges. But often, if, as Alice says, if you can help to find the people who lead the areas you're in, the labs or whatever, that can be really helpful. I'm used to have responsibility within my faculty for a Center for Social Research and Health and a Center for Social Policy Research. And they mostly did contract research. And so the people who were doing the research were people who were hired to just finalize the report for government or whatever. But how would they then bring their develop up their expertise so that they could be competitive for grants? Required a discussion about holistically about the center of how they could ensure that within the resourcing for the various reports, they kept enough funding so that various people could take turns to have one lead author paper on methodology or on analysis or on something else, so that they could not just live year to year on government projects, but actually position themselves for those bigger grants. So that's one way that those who are in leadership positions can help to support those who are trying to get into a position to be able to apply for a fellowship. But it is a tricky environment to get that balance right.
I'm going to ask a nitty-gritty question before we get into the audience questions, which is, I think, probably the most obvious one. And I appreciate this is going to differ for every single application that you see and every person that you deal with. But can each of the panel members please give me the most important thing that you're looking for in a fellowship application that you're writing or that somebody close to you is writing that you think is going to boost their score, and then the thing that you're thinking to yourself that there is going to really hurt them. For example, the thing that really hurts when I'm reading fellowship applications is a whole bunch of publications listed with absolutely no justification as to why they're there. Just a long list. It certainly doesn't help. But could we go around the panel and just say what's the thing that you're really trying to bring out in somebody's fellowship application that you think is going to serve them the best, and what are the things which you're saying that's a red flag and I wouldn't be including that one? James, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think when I'm reading applications, what I want to see is it become immediately crystal clear why that applicant is the only person who can carry out this research, and how they nucleate a larger team around themselves that builds a critical mass around this question. And that question is going to change whether it's on the NHMRC or ARC side, but I think that's really dependent on that person is the only person who can make this critical question work. And yeah, that will come through across the entire team and be like a cohesive story throughout the entire fellowship. I think that you come out and you go, wow, that was incredible. That's very difficult to do. I won't pretend like I'm good at that. I think it's a long term to build that, and it takes time. I think probably also one thing I would agree with you about the publication list, Jarmon, of just showing out quantity over quality. I think probably there was a shift in Australian science maybe 10 years ago where initially it was quantity was great. Now I feel like we're really looking for this thing called impact, and we want to know why all these papers build into the cohesive story, and that they're actually delivering on the goals of that fellowship. I think. So if your papers aren't able to do that, I think can be challenging as well. And I guess that's just, the narrative that you create around the papers.
Elise?
Yeah, I think something that you will find at different stages of career, I think is, for me, I look for cohesion, which James mentioned. I think a story has to be cohesive, your leadership has to be cohesive. I look for rigor. One thing that I found is a killer in an application is when there's no rigor. And that means in the way you write, in the way you present the work, in everything. It has to be scientifically rigorous. That to me is essential. Of course, enthusiasm and vision are important, but that develops with time. So you can't be expected when you are 2 years post PhD to have a wide vision for research. And I think reviewers know that. So you kind of need to trust also that the system reviewers know what they're doing as well, and they can assess where you are in your seniority or juniority. One thing I would say with that idea of rigor is look at the metrics. When you write something, make it easy. Just go back all the time to the score. And if we're talking an HMRC, for instance, it's very easy. You've got those scores, 7 to whichever number. Every time you write something, when you're ready with your draft, just go back and check, am I answering a 7? Most likely than not, most of us will not be answering a 7, but we should aim for a 7 so that we can arrive at a 6 and make sure that it is very, very clear that you are answering all those points, because at the end it becomes some type of metrics, and that's what reviewers will have to mark you around.
Sue, would you like to comment?
Just briefly, agree that dot points, or lists don't give an argument. You need a coherent argument, and the information you're providing needs to all work together to basically answer the question of why you, why this, why now, and what next. Right? Those things need to all be there, but that's not an easy thing. And then overreach is a killer. If someone claims that they're doing something that's unheard of and no one could possibly validate it, then it's going to look as if it's just a grab.
Thank you. Winnie, would you be able to share the results of the polls or the questions? We're going to try and share screen.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Let's have a look at the polls. Yeah. So this was, where are you in your fellowship journey? And probably as expected, it's a small sample size, but at the moment, most people are in the unsuccessful so far, with a few holding fellowships. So I'm just curious, which is good. So do you want to have a look at the other ones? What's the hardest part about writing a fellowship? Track record positioning. So that comes back to the idea of quality versus quantity. So obviously we all have a lot of things we could possibly chuck into a fellowship application, but knowing which ones tell a story and help you craft that narrative and aren't just there for the buzzwords is important. And also demonstrating independence leadership. And most people are in the NHMRC and in the ARC. It's probably to be expected. Thank you. Could we go to the questions now, please? Thank you. So we might ask this one to the panel, the top question there. I think this sort of gets asked more generally in terms of just being successful and making lab head and things like that. But is international experience necessary or encouraged to be competitive for a fellowship? And international collaborations, do they help it? Would anyone like to answer that?
I'm happy to. I think anything that is justified and that shows that you have reach, and that is good. You don't need to just try to get a collaboration because it looks good. It has to make total sense. You have to justify that this is the best collaboration you could establish, you led to answer that very big question you are aiming to follow for a while. International conference, I think having being invited as a speaker is a good thing. Although, if I'm not wrong, I might be wrong, but it's not an easy thing to put anymore in fellowship applications. So, not too sure how important it is today compared to the past. But my point is, don't just do things because they token and they signal. Just do them because they are actually relevant. We all have energy to spend. There's no point spending it where it's not going to be useful. So it has to be relevant to your proposal.
Thank you, Elise.
And I think also in terms of the international experience, I think when I was finishing my PhD somehow 10 years ago now, I was told, yes, you did need to go overseas, do a postdoc there. But I think I was probably the last generation in Australia where that was still considered a necessity. And I think now you can absolutely get away with and thrive doing a postdoc in Australia and not doing that international postdoc fellowship. And I think it really depends again on what you're looking to get out of that international postdoc. If it's going to move you in the direction you want your career to go in, then it's great. But I don't think anymore it's a necessity by any means.
It's good to hear. I haven't moved internationally myself, but no, I think that rhetoric that is changing as well. I think I've noticed that shift. Certainly when I was doing my PhD, it seemed like a necessity, and now it's not the message that I'm telling people at the moment. Again, if it's useful, if it adds something, if there's a reason to go, if you're going to pick up some amazing skill overseas that you can't pick up here, then that would make sense. But otherwise, not just for the fun of it. Maybe for the fun of it. Actually, for the fun of it might be a good idea, but it's not necessary. We have just hit the 11:30 mark. Can I ask if the panelists are happy to stay on for another 5 to 10 minutes, because there are a few extra questions, and I've got a couple of up my sleeve as well. The second question there on the list was that some labs will only offer postdoc roles if you come with a fellowship funding. So how do you go about actually applying for a fellowship without being in the lab and having the support of the lab? It seems like a tricky sort of one to negotiate. And at the moment, I'm doing something similar with somebody who doesn't hold Australian citizenship, and that's caused all sorts of problems as well, because a lot of fellowships here in Australia, you need to have citizenship or have applied to PR, and that's a very lengthy process indeed. Any comments on how to navigate that? Elise?
Look, I think that goes back to what we're talking about before. Before writing the fellowship, you need to sit down with yourself and see where you want to go. If your current lab doesn't support, if the current lab doesn't support your fellowship application, then you need to think of where else you're going to go, and then contact whoever that is, and make sure that you have a plan together. It is really difficult. I see that often. I think the best way is try to go back to what you want to do and stick with it, and almost ignore the rest, and try to shape that application that you think is the right one, finding the labs where you could do this work if it is successful, not necessarily staying where you are. And really reaching out. I think in the stem cell field, I feel we're a really good community, very collegial. Don't be afraid to reach out. Like, I'm really happy to answer you, and I'm sure my colleagues are the same. Get advice from other people. Don't be too shy about that. And that way you create a network that might help you navigate that time, where for that time, that special time.
So thank you very much. So I had a couple of extra questions, but again, people in the audience, please feel free to use the raise hand function. In particular, one I wanted to ask to you, Elise, was you have tapped into the NHMRC and ARC. I'm just wondering, is that using the same sort of project and track record, and you've managed to tweak the language and remove the medical jargon, or did you come at those two things with very different sorts of project ideas, and sort of then had to tailor a very different sort of track record and set of papers for one versus the other? How did you navigate that?
I think it's very different. So I got early, at the time, it was a Career Development Award from the NHMRC. These are the second most junior, and then I got the Senior Fellowship, and in between I had an ARC Future Fellowship. And I must say, not because we have someone from the ARC here, but the Future Fellowship was the best fellowship I've ever applied for. Unfortunately, they're stopping it, but it was an absolute pleasure to write that fellowship, because it was fundamental, really big question, fundamental research. So I really enjoyed, and it gave me, I think for my career, it really helped tremendously. The NHMRC is also great, no doubt, but it's much more focused now, at least for my work, onto health. So you need to shift you can still do fairly the same work. You just need to shift the focus to explain it either very fundamental or translational. That's what I do. And I think it works because most of our work today is on that panel. I found that we've got the portfolio of activities that go from very fundamental to the perhaps at time more commercial. So it's kind of logical. It's not a big stretch to go for one or the other. You just need to put on your translational versus fundamental brain to explain what you're doing. But at the end, I think you kind of can do fairly similar stuff with those fellowships, which, yeah, again, to me, they've always been wonderful activities I could follow once I had those fellowships.
Thank you. Sue, I've got a question for you. If you don't mind, thank you. So I'm thinking big picture here, looking ahead, maybe over the next decade. Are you able to comment, and it doesn't have to be sort of ARC specific here, of course, but are you able to comment on how you see that Australian sort of fellowship landscape evolving, or what you would like to see, what you think is possible in order to sort of help our upcoming generation of early career scientists?
Look, I think it's a really important question, and one that a large number of people are, grappling with. As you would appreciate, higher education in Australia has seen a huge shift in the funding environment, both a change in how government supports universities, both with the teaching and research, and in how government policy is shaping the capacity for both international PhD students to come into Australia, but also undergraduate students or master's students who may be helping to support the funding of universities to support excellent research. So we're at a transition point in higher education and in research. And I think there are things like the strategic examination of research and development in Australia that's due to report, I think, within the next 10 days, that will provide some indication of government's direction for the broader research landscape, everything from industry commercialization back to the training pipeline. And we've got the National Competitive Grants Program review coming through. NHMRC is also reviewing its programs. So it's not, so you're asking me what it's going to look like in 10 years' time. I can't tell. I do think the current international environment, both within research and geopolitically, makes it particularly difficult because some people may have thought at one point, oh, well, there's the option of going to the US and doing my research there. Well, it's much, much more difficult for many people to do that. And it's much more difficult for US institutions to support it because in many areas of research, the funding is being pulled back. This is not to be doom and gloom. It's just to keep your eyes open to the horizon and think about what's going on. I think the CERT will be a good indication of the government's interest in supporting early and mid-career researchers. The Academy of Science has put out a report, a 30-year horizon report on what skills there may be. I think other academies are looking at what's our intellectual intergenerational capacity, because there's a whole bunch of people who are like me at the retirement point who will be leaving the sector. How do we make sure that there's a strong sector going forward? So I think there will be a good research environment. It's just not exactly clear to me exactly where that will be. So you can't pitch things right now for this is what my career is going to be like for the next 30 years, but you can think about where do I want to be in the next 5 to 10 years so that you can keep alert to that. Sorry not to be able to give a clear answer, but that's the best I can do.
It is a bit of a crystal ball sort of one, this one, isn't it? Has anyone on the panel got an idea of, not to say that Australia is doing things badly, obviously we would love more funding, that's, but are there any other examples of places that are doing things particularly well, something that we could borrow from anywhere overseas, maybe that they're less fellowship heavy or more fellowship heavy, but they've done it a slightly different way? Have you seen things being done slightly differently, or maybe they're funding people not necessarily through fellowships, but more through sort of like as staff scientists instead, and just supporting people in different ways rather than this very fellowship centric, which is very wearing on the people.
And the fellowship centrism, I think, is particularly in medical research. It's not so much in other areas. Of course, in areas like humanities, there's only now the start of a fellowship culture at all. There weren't postdocs when I finished my PhD. There weren't research-only roles. People were teaching research throughout, and that's the predominant approach still. So just there's within disciplines, there's a piece. Internationally, in some places, is a stronger industry connection that then feeds back into universities, depending on where you are. In some environments, there's less dependence because there's more security of funding for the institution, less dependence on the individual chasing fellowships. They've focused more on funding projects. And in the Canadian system, for example, at various points, there's been much more focus on the network across the country rather than the institutional piece, so that you got funded for your contribution to a national project rather than at an institution X, Y, or Z. So there are lots of different examples around the place. There's some really good ones, there's some really bad ones, but you kind of need to think of it systemically. But I don't know, James and Elise, I'm sure you've got different experience.
Yeah, I was thinking also just what you mentioned, Susan, of countries that have more industry academia connections. So I guess for me, a good example would be Denmark, maybe with Novo Nordisk. They provide a lot of funding through many aspects of science in Denmark, and I guess that's challenging. Not every country has a company like Novo Nordisk Foundation to fund that, but I guess that was something they built towards probably close to 100 years ago when they bought insulin, licensed insulin. Can't really, the industry in Australia probably is a long road to match that, but I think an approach like that where you have more direct industry connection, funding into academia, I think is only going to build a great kind of connection in the pipeline to drive discovery into translation, whilst also providing more security for those EMCRs. So that's the first thing that jumps into my mind. Not sure if Elise has any other suggestions.
I don't have suggestions. I don't know. I don't of all my colleagues worldwide, I don't hear of a good system. I think everybody's struggling one way or another. Like the French might have a job for life, but then they have no money to do research. So they also feel quite despair in their research at times. I think what's special about Australia, of course, is that we don't have that long-term support as a research-intensive career. But let's not forget that there are other career paths. Everything is not just research focused only. Yeah, we can teach, we can go in the private sector, we can go in the service sectors, we can do other stuff as well. And I feel one of my responsibility as a more senior person now is to remind people there are different career paths, and that path of being, that all academic path is not perhaps the way forward, because the world is changing, and with it, its demands and how we are productive, and maybe it's not really productive what we're doing right now, and that's why it's so difficult, because we're in a transition towards something that's not established yet. One issue I see in Australia is the industry jobs are very reduced. We don't have much pharma, so how do the thinking heads of the country try to get this sorted so we get all these very smart people trained in the academic sector to be as if not more productive in a private sector where they could contribute their research as well, their science. So I think it's a bigger picture than the individual here, and I hope that we have people thinking about it and trying to develop this. To me, that would be a way forward, rather than just those fellowships that by design are made to be competitive and ultra competitive. I don't see this as a sustainable system for science in Australia.
Thank you, and that is a lovely positive note to end on there. That yes, there are definitely ways forward and ways for us to sort of move away from this ivory tower academic only sort of mindset and into things that are more practical going forward. We'll bring the session to a close because we have got a little bit over time. Thank you very much to our panelists, James, Elise, and Sue, for sharing their time and their wisdom with us. There will be another conversation next week, I believe, the local conversation, stem cell conversation. And thank you all for participating. This conversation will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, so feel free to catch it again there if you'd like. And just join panelists once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's a lot of claps.